and welcome back to Newfoundland and Labrador Studies 2205. This is Unit 3, The Country Grows, Section 4, Lesson 1, on the Great Fire. I'm Miss Fleming, I'm your instructor for this course. Let's get going on this section. Before we begin this section, I wanted to talk about how it's going to work. We will be exploring significant historical events that occurred in Newfoundland and Labrador from the late 1800s through the first half of the 20th century. Now, in order for an event to be considered historically significant, it should meet the following criteria: deep consequences for the people involved, and consequences are felt for a long period of time. We talked about this throughout the course, but this entire section is based from a historically significant standpoint. The reason why we're doing this right now is because this time in history represented a lot of change, not just in this place, but all around the world. There were a tremendous amount of historically significant events from the 1890s through to the first half of the 20th century. So let's talk about the Great Fire. This is referring to the city of St. John's, which is the capital of Newfoundland and Labrador. A small fire broke out in a barn on the corner of Freshwater and Pennywell Road on the afternoon of July 8, 1892. The location of the barn is pointed out on the map with the red arrow. So there's the first step. At first, the fire was contained, but the flames spread due to dry weather conditions and the wind. The dry weather conditions would make the fire spread very quickly, and the wind would make it jump from structure to structure, usually from roof to roof. And the fire's rapid progress alarmed the city's residents, and they began to act. And because of its rapid progress, 2/3 of the city was destroyed. The city at that time was centered mostly around what was considered the downtown core, around the harbour, Water Street, Duckworth Street, and the surrounding area. So 2 actions by city officials and the fire department contributed greatly to the spread of the blaze. So we're going to add those steps in to our cause and effects. Okay, so fire breaks out in a barn. We already talked about that. There was a recent fire department training exercise, and it had depleted the department's water tanks, and they hadn't been refilled yet. There was actually a water tank right up the road from the barn. If it had been filled, then the fire would have been put out fairly easily. So we have that, along with dry weather conditions. Additionally, the city had shut off the water supply that day to install new pipes. Plumbing was changing. It was the late 1800s. Modern plumbing was being brought into many structures, and it had been like over an hour before water could be filling the pipes again and having enough pressure so that hoses could be used. So you have both of those 2 elements bringing into this situation. Wind spreads the fire from structure to structure. There's no water in the pipes to help put it out as it travels. And there's no water in the tanks either. And ultimately, of course, we know that 2/3 of the city was destroyed. So let's talk about actions as the fire spread. By 6 p.m., people began to store their valuables in the stone cathedrals and other brick buildings, thinking they would not burn. By 8 p.m., the fire had reached the core of the city's downtown, where people panicked and began to loot and ransack stores and businesses. Residents who lived in the upper part of these businesses on Duckworth and Water Street began to flee with all their belongings they could carry. Ships in the harbour sailed out so as not to be destroyed, and some people also went aboard those ships for safety as well. They managed to travel out through the Narrows and waited until the blaze had gone out. Many people camped out in Bannerman Park or the surrounding property of the Roman Catholic Basilica, which were both out of the reach of the flames. They were far enough up on the hill, so you can see in this picture here, it's right up there. And all of the fire was downhill from there. The fire burned through the night until approximately 5:30 the next morning. More than 2/3 of St. John's was destroyed, leaving 11,000 people homeless and causing $13 million in property damage. That's a lot of money now, let alone in 1892. Ultimately, 3 women also died who were trapped in a house and could not escape. Relief funds were created in Canada and Britain to help the displaced people with shelter, food, and clothing. In this bottom image here, you actually see a bit of a tent city that was set up in Bannerman Park. The things that people were thankful for was because the fires in the summertime, at least it was warm, so that they could camp out until their houses could be rebuilt. Considering the fire destroyed much of the city's commercial center, Newfoundland and Labrador experienced a sudden economic downturn as many businesses had to rebuild. By September, wooden houses were being constructed, and it took about 2 years to rebuild some of the stone buildings. That's except for this building here. The longest restoration project was the Anglican Cathedral, which was almost completely destroyed. It was approximately a decade before the work could be complete. And the thing is, the reason for that is because it was such a large building. It needed so much restructuring, not just the wooden roofs that had to be redone, but the entirety of the interior. Especially if you're looking at that bottom image there, that's taken from inside of the church. The fire also prompted government officials to restructure the city's fire services and invest in better training and equipment. So now it's time to review. I'm going to ask you to please complete the activities in Brightspace and have a great day. Every lesson during this section has what's called a historical significance chart and a reflection question for you to complete on the lesson.